The café was alive with chatter, the hiss of steaming milk, and the clink of ceramic cups. For most people, it was just another ordinary morning. But for her, it became the stage of her deepest humiliation. She stepped into the line, quiet and modest, her sweater pulled close around her body as though it were armor. She kept her head slightly bowed, hoping to move unnoticed. But scars, no matter how much you try to hide them, have a way of demanding attention. The whispers started first. A pair of women at a corner table glanced at her, then leaned close together, their laughter muffled behind manicured hands. A young man standing 2 places ahead turned to look over his shoulder, eyes lingering far too long. Then came the smirk, the shake of the head, the judgment that needed no words. When she reached for her wallet, her sleeve shifted, revealing the pale, jagged ridges that cut across her skin like lightning frozen in flesh. The gasps were soft at first, but they spread like sparks in dry grass. Laughter followed. Someone muttered, "What happened to her? Looks like she was in a fire." Another voice, sharper, crueler. Or maybe a fight she lost. She felt every word like a dagger. Her hand trembled as she tried to adjust her sleeve back down, but it was too late. The scars had spoken louder than she ever could. She wanted to disappear, to melt into floor, to escape the heat of the stairs burning into her. And yet, through the humiliation, she remained silent. No defense, no explanation, just quiet resilience. But what no one in that cafe knew, what none of the laughing voices or curious eyes could possibly imagine, was that those scars were not marks of shame. They were marks of sacrifice. And beneath the fabric of her sleeve rested a tattoo, faded yet unmistakable, carrying the weight of a history few could comprehend. It was the kind of tattoo that only those who had walked through fire themselves would ever recognize. The kind of tattoo that would soon silence the laughter of every single person in that room. Because before the morning ended, a decorated war veteran would step through those cafe doors. His eyes would fall upon that symbol, and everything, every cruel word, every mocking laugh, would come crashing to a halt. Long before that humiliating morning, she lived a life built on simplicity. Her home was small but tidy, nestled at the edge of a quiet neighborhood where the days blended together in gentle rhythms. She woke early, brewed her coffee in the same chipped mug, and sat by the window as the world stirred awake outside. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet woman who kept to herself. She was polite, always offering a soft smile, but rarely lingered for conversation. Children whispered that she was mysterious. Adults assumed she was shy. Few ever asked questions, and fewer still received answers. What they never saw was the world inside her home. On the mantel sat a row of photographs, some in frames, others tucked carefully behind the glass. Faded snapshots of dusty roads, uniforms, and unfamiliar landscapes. She would pause sometimes, fingers brushing across the edges, eyes lingering on faces frozen in time. Faces she would never see again. The scars that traced her arms and shoulders were reminders of those years. But she did not speak of them. To her, they were not trophies to display or secrets to reveal. They were simply pieces of her story, woven into her skin, carried in silence. Despite the weight of her past, she built a life of gentleness. She worked at the local library, shelving books with quiet precision, helping children find stories that made their eyes light up. She volunteered once a week at the food bank, her hands moving tirelessly to fill boxes for families in need. She found solace in tending to her small garden, coaxing color from the soil, coaxing peace from the earth. But no matter how carefully she lived, the world never let her forget. Strangers' stares, careless whispers, the way conversations sometimes fell silent when her sleeve slipped back. It was a constant reminder that people saw the scars before they saw her. Still, she endured, because she knew something they did not. Her scars were not born of weakness. They were born of courage. And on the day she walked into that cafe, surrounded by laughter and mockery, fate was already moving. Soon the truth would come to light, and every person who had ever judged her would be forced to confront what those scars truly meant. The cafe incident was not the first time she had endured cruel stares, but it was certainly one of the loudest. What began with whispers quickly became something far uglier. At a nearby table, a group of college students chuckled openly, their voices carrying across the room. One of them pointed directly at her arm, nudging his friend with a smirk. "Look, she's falling apart," he sneered. Another added, "I bet she tells people it's a shark attack just to get sympathy." The laughter grew louder. Even the barista at the counter, though she tried to hide it, gave a fleeting glance that lingered a second too long. That single second spoke volumes. Curiosity mixed with judgment. The woman kept her head down, her hands clasped tightly together on the counter as she waited for her order. She wanted nothing more than to be invisible, but invisibility had never been an option since the day her scars were carved into her skin. A mother standing behind her pulled her child closer, whispering, "Don't stare." The child asked innocently, "What happened to her?" The mother gave no answer, only a shake of the head and a tug on the arm. The woman's face flushed hot. She could feel the walls closing in, the air thick with ridicule. Every laugh, every whisper pressed against her chest until her breath came shallow and ragged. And then came the cruelest comment of all. A man in a suit, briefcase at his side, leaned toward his companion and said just loudly enough to be heard, "If I had scars like that, I'd never leave my house." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred, but still she said nothing. Silence was her shield, and she clung to it with every ounce of strength she had left. Yet silence did not stop them. When she reached for her cup at the counter, her sleeve slipped again, bearing the tattoo inked into her skin. A circle, a number, a set of wings. Faded but unmistakable. The students laughed harder. One snorted, "What's that supposed to be?" "Some prison gang symbol." Another chimed in, "No way that's real. She probably got it at some cheap parlor to look tough." The woman froze, her fingers tightening around the cup. That tattoo was not just ink. It was a memory, a bond, a mark of service etched into her flesh during the darkest days of her life. To hear it dismissed as a joke was almost more unbearable than the laughter at her scars. But still, she remained silent, because she knew, deep down, that her truth did not need defending. Not to them. What she did not know was that her silence was about to be broken by someone else. Someone who carried the same mark. Someone whose life had once depended on people like her. The tattoo remained visible longer this time. The cuff of her sleeve caught against her wrist. She considered tugging it down, but the stares had already locked onto it. Seriously, one of the students said, leaning forward in mock curiosity, "What does it mean? You in a biker gang?" The woman pressed her lips together, her silence only fueling their amusement. The man in the suit glanced at it too, frowning. "Looks military. But there's no way. Look at her. She doesn't fit the type." The phrase stung more than she cared to admit. Doesn't fit the type. As though courage and sacrifice belonged to a select few. As though scars and survival could be boxed neatly into stereotypes. She lowered her gaze, trying to shield the tattoo with her other hand. But the damage was done. The café had grown quieter now. Not silent, but tense. The laughter was fading, replaced with curiosity. More eyes drifted toward her arm, more murmurs rising. Some were cruel, others were simply confused. But all of them were watching. And then the café door opened. A gust of cool air swept in, and with it came a man whose presence seemed to shift the entire room. He wore a weathered jacket, his hair trimmed short, his posture rigid despite the limp in his step. His eyes were sharp, scanning the café like a soldier assessing a battlefield. He moved with quiet authority, the kind of presence that demanded respect without a word. The barista straightened, the students fell silent. Even the man in the suit paused mid-sentence. But when the veteran's gaze fell upon the woman's arm, everything changed. His breath caught, his steps faltered. For the first time since entering, the calm mask of discipline cracked. The tattoo, he knew it instantly. The unit insignia. The mark only those who had served in that exact division would ever carry. The café fell silent. All eyes darting between the scarred woman and the veteran who now stood frozen in place. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee order slip. Finally, he stepped forward, his voice low but shaking with recognition. "Where did you get that tattoo?" The crowd stiffened. The mocking laughter died completely. For the first time, the attention on her scars and ink was not ridicule. It was reverence. The woman raised her eyes, meeting his, and in that instant, the truth she had carried silently for years began to unfurl. The café seemed to shrink around them. Every eye followed the veteran as he stepped closer, his boots dragging slightly on the tiled floor, his gaze fixed on the tattoo peeking from beneath her sleeve. The once boisterous students were silent now, their laughter smothered by the gravity that had entered the room. The woman shifted uneasily and used to such direct attention. For years, she had hidden, avoided confrontation, endured ridicule in silence. But the weight in the veteran's eyes was not ridicule. It was something heavier, something deeper. He stopped just a few feet from her, his hands trembling ever so slightly. His voice, when it finally came, was low, hoarse, as though dragged across old wounds. That tattoo, it belongs to the 91st Medical Evacuation Unit. The woman's breath caught. The sound of those words, spoken aloud after so many years, was like a door opening to a past she had locked away. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The veteran swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as his eyes darted across her face, her scars, her weary composure. For a moment, the soldier in him faltered, replaced by the raw humanity of someone confronting a ghost from his own past. "You were there," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Kandahar. The ambush." Gasps echoed in the café. The students looked at one another, stunned. The man in the suit lowered his eyes, guilt creeping across his features. The barista stood frozen, her hands gripping the counter. The woman nodded slowly, her sleeve falling back further to reveal more of the tattoo. "I was there." The veteran's knees nearly buckled. He stumbled forward, gripping the back of a nearby chair for support. "I remember you. You pulled us out. We thought we were finished, but you came running into the fire. You carried people on your back." She lowered her gaze, her voice steady but quiet. "I did what I had to do." The café was utterly still now. The laughter that had filled the air minutes before was gone, replaced by silence, so thick it pressed against the chest. The veteran's eyes glistened, his hand reaching instinctively toward her, though he stopped short, as if afraid to break the fragile moment. "You saved my life," he whispered. Her lips parted, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She remembered his face, though younger than, bloodied, terrified, clinging to survival as she dragged him toward safety. Her scars burned at the memory, not with shame, but with the weight of what had been endured. The crowd shifted, whispers breaking out, not of mockery now, but of awe. A transformation had begun. The veteran lowered himself into the chair opposite her, his body heavy with the burden of memory. The room, though full, felt like it contained only the two of them. The world outside might as well not have existed. "I never knew what happened to you," he said, his voice steadying, though his eyes still glistened. "After that night, they told us some of the medics never made it back. I thought you were one of them." She shook her head gently, her hands folded on the table. "I survived. Barely. The scars." She lifted her sleeve slightly, revealing more of the ridge, pale marks running across her arm, "are the price I paid." The veteran's jaw clenched, his hand curling into a fist against the table. "You call it a price. I call it a gift. Without you, half of us wouldn't have come home at all." Her eyes softened, though she remained quiet. Years of silence had trained her not to seek recognition, not to relive the horrors of that night. But here, in this unlikely place, in front of strangers who had mocked her, the truth was spilling out. The students leaned forward, no trace of humor left in their faces. The man in the suit adjusted his tie nervously, unable to meet her eyes. Even the barista abandoned her post, moving closer to listen. The veteran's voice grew stronger, carrying across the café. "You were more than a medic. You were a savior. I remember the vehicle was burning, rounds were snapping overhead, and you just ran into it like you didn't care about yourself. You dragged me and two others out. You didn't stop, even when shrapnel tore into your side." Her fingers tightened slightly around her cup. The pain of those nights still echoed in her body, but she had long accepted it as part of her. She nodded slowly, confirming his words. "I remember your face, she admitted softly. You were the one who kept saying, "Don't let me die." His breath hitched. He looked down, shaking his head. And you didn't let me. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was reverent, filled with the weight of truth. The veteran finally looked up, his voice trembling but proud. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, turned to address the room. "This woman you laughed at, this woman you mocked, she is a hero. Those scars you pointed at, they are battle scars. They are the marks of someone who risked her life to save others. And that tattoo, that is not decoration. That is a unit mark, a brotherhood, a family. She earned it in blood." The café erupted in hushed murmurs, but not one dared laugh now. Heads bowed, eyes dropped. The cruel smirks had vanished, replaced by guilt and awe. The woman sat still, humbled by his words, but also uncomfortable. She had never wanted recognition. She had never asked for applause. All she wanted was to live quietly, to carry her past without judgment. But today, it was no longer just her burden. The veteran reached across the table, his hand hovering before gently resting atop hers. "I never got to thank you. Not properly, but I will say it now. Thank you for my life, for the lives of my brothers, for everything." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I only did what anyone would have done." He shook his head firmly. "No, not anyone. Few would run into fire. Few would bear scars so others could live. You did, and that makes you extraordinary." The café was silent again, but it was not the silence of ridicule. It was the silence of reverence, of recognition. And for the first time in years, she no longer felt invisible. The café, once buzzing with laughter, was now heavy with silence. The people who had ridiculed her stared at their shoes, their coffee cups, anywhere but her face. Shame was written across them as clear as ink on paper. The students, who only minutes earlier had treated her scars like a punchline, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them cleared his throat, murmuring, We didn't know." The veteran's head snapped toward them, his voice sharp with controlled anger. "You didn't care to know. You saw scars and thought they were a joke. You saw silence and thought it was weakness. But you never stopped to ask what those scars meant." The young man swallowed hard, his smirk long gone. His friend muttered, "We were wrong." The man in the suit, who had so casually suggested she should never leave her house, loosened his tie as if it were choking him. I just... His words faltered under the weight of the veteran's glare. "You did mean it," the veteran said coldly. "You meant every word until you realized the truth. And now the truth makes you uncomfortable. Good. Maybe next time you'll think before you open your mouth." The barista, cheeks flushed red, stepped out from behind the counter. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. I should have stopped it. I should have said something." The woman looked at her, her eyes soft despite the sting of humiliation she'd endured. "It is all right," she said gently. "You know now." Her words carried a grace that none of them deserved, and yet it made them feel the weight of their cruelty even more. The veteran stood tall, addressing the entire room. "You all judged her in ignorance. But hear me now. She is braver than all of you combined. She bore scars so that others could come home. She carries pain so others could live. While you sat in safety, she stood in fire." Heads bowed. No one laughed now. No one dared. The transformation was complete. The café had turned from a place of mockery into a place of reverence. And at its center sat the woman, not as a victim, but as a symbol of silent courage. The veteran turned back to her, his eyes filled with the weight of memory. "Tell them," he urged softly. "They need to know." For a long moment, she hesitated. She had kept her past buried, not out of shame, but out of a desire to move forward. Yet now, with the truth spilling into the open, she felt a shift inside herself. Perhaps it was time. She drew a breath, steady and deliberate, and began. "It was Afghanistan," she said quietly, her voice carrying through the silent café. "I was a medic with the 91st. We were tasked with evacuating the wounded after an ambush. The convoy had been hit hard, vehicles burning, ammunition cooking off. There were cries everywhere, soldiers pinned, bleeding, trapped. Her eyes clouded as the memories surged back, but she pressed on. I ran in with nothing but my kit and a stretcher. I remember the heat of the flames, the smoke that clawed at my lungs. Every step felt like it might be my last, but I could not stop. They were calling for help. They needed someone. She lifted her sleeve fully now, exposing the jagged scars running up her arm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was from shrapnel when one of the vehicles exploded. I felt the metal tear into me, but I kept moving. I dragged one man out, then another. I do not even know how many trips I made into that fire. I only remember the faces like his. She nodded toward the veteran, whose eyes glistened with tears. Her voice wavered, but her strength did not falter. I thought I would die there. I thought the flames would take me. But when the last man was out, when the smoke cleared, I realized I was still alive. Scarred, burned, broken, but alive. The café was silent, except for the sound of quiet sobs. The students wiped at their eyes. The barista covered her mouth. Even the man in the suit stared at her, as though seeing her for the first time. The veteran's voice broke the silence, reverent and filled with awe. I remember that night. I remember the screaming, the fire, the terror, and I remember you running back again and again when the rest of us could not move. You saved us all. Every one of us owes you our lives. The woman lowered her sleeves slowly, her scars once again hidden, though the truth of them would never be forgotten. She looked around the room, her eyes calm. I never wanted recognition. I never wanted thanks. I only wanted to do what was right. The veteran nodded solemnly. And you did, more than anyone could ever ask. The café, filled with people who had moments ago been cruel and mocking, now sat in humble silence, forever changed by the story they had heard. For a long moment, no one moved. The café was wrapped in silence, every person still processing the transformation that had unfolded before their eyes. The woman who had walked in quietly, mocked for her scars, now sat as the embodiment of courage itself. Then, slowly it began. The barista, who had earlier flushed with shame, stepped forward first. She removed her apron, folding it nervously in her hands. "Ma'am," she said softly, her voice breaking, "I need to say thank you, not just for what you did then, but for what you're doing now. You reminded all of us that judgment is easy, but respect is earned, and you earn it 1,000 times over." The woman gave a small, gentle nod. One of the students, his face pale with guilt, pushed back his chair and stood. He approached her cautiously, as though approaching something sacred. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice cracking. "We all were. I laughed because it was easy, because it made me feel clever. But now I see how cruel it was. I am sorry, truly sorry." Another student added, her eyes red from tears, "We didn't deserve your silence, but maybe we can learn from it. Thank you for everything." The veteran rose to his feet then, commanding the room with his presence. He turned to face the crowd, his voice steady, strong, filled with the authority of lived experience. "You mocked her scars," he said, each word deliberate. "But those scars are proof of her strength. You dismissed her tattoo, but that mark is a bond that saved lives, including mine. And now you know, she is not someone to laugh at. She is someone to honor." The café erupted in quiet applause, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. People clapped not for a spectacle, but for respect. Even those who had said nothing earlier joined in, their eyes wet, their faces solemn. The man in the suit, who had once declared she should never leave her house, stepped forward, his hands trembling. "I cannot undo what I said," he admitted, "but I can carry the lesson. You deserve more than apologies. You deserve gratitude." He extended his hand. She hesitated, then shook it, her grace disarming even the heaviest guilt. It was a moment none of them would ever forget. In a single afternoon, a room filled with ridicule had become a room filled with reverence. And at the center of it all sat the simple woman, unchanged in her humility, but transformed in the eyes of everyone around her. When the crowd finally began to disperse, the veteran remained by her side. They sat together in the quiet aftermath, Two lives once joined by fire and chaos, now reunited by chance in a suburban cafe. You changed everything today, he told her. She shook her head gently. No, I did nothing but exist. The truth changed everything. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe that's a lesson. The truth does not always need to shout. Sometimes it only needs to stand, scars and all, until others finally see it. She smiled faintly, her eyes soft. Scars are not shame. They are stories. Every line, every mark is a chapter of survival. I carry them so others could live. That is enough for me. The veteran's voice was low, reverent, and it will never be forgotten. Not by me, not by them, and now, not by anyone who hears the story. As they left the cafe together, the whispers followed them. Not whispers of cruelty this time, but of respect, of awe. The same people who had laughed hours earlier now looked at her with admiration, their eyes filled with the weight of recognition. For the woman, nothing had changed. Her scars were still there. Her tattoo still marked her past. Her life remained simple, quiet, humble, but the world around her had shifted. A veil had been lifted, a lesson delivered. And for those who witnessed it, the message was clear. Never judge the scars you do not understand, because behind every scar lies a story of pain, of sacrifice, of survival. And sometimes those stories belong to heroes who walk quietly among us, never asking for praise, only carrying the weight of what they endured. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the street, the veteran paused and looked at her one last time. You may think you are just a simple woman, he said softly, but to me and to many, you are living proof of what courage looks like. She said nothing, only offered him the faintest of smiles. And together, they walked on, the quiet hero and the soldier whose life she had saved, leaving behind a cafe forever changed.